I never imagined my life would unravel inside a notary's office that smelled like mothballs and stale ink. But there I was, seated beside my cousin Damien, while the lawyer in his stiff navy suit read my grandmother's final will. The air felt heavier with every breath, like it carried all the unspoken tensions of a family pretending to be civil. Damien lounged comfortably in his chair, one arm draped casually along the back, his lips curled in a smug half-smile. Of course he looked relaxed. He was always the favorite, the golden boy, the one with the finance degree and the fancy condo in downtown Seattle. Meanwhile, I, Eliana Rowan, was the quiet cousin, the one who worked in archives and never brought a boyfriend home, the one they sometimes forgot to copy on family emails. The lakefront condominium at Greenview Towers, the lawyer announced, his voice as dry as old paper, goes to Damien Charles Rowan. Damien gave a small, triumphant chuckle. Well, he whispered loudly enough for me to hear, that'll save me a mortgage. He didn't even look at me, but I could feel his eyes mocking me all the same. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. My grandmother, Yelena, had been many things. Kind, reserved, deeply private. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that she would remember our late-night chats, the books I brought her, the time I took unpaid leave to care for her after her fall, that she would see me. The lawyer continued, flipping a page with the final rustle of parchment. The property located in Dusk Hollow Village, including the main house, surrounding land, and all contents within, is bequeathed to Eliana Rowan. Dusk Hollow. The name hit me like a cold draft through a cracked window. That old village tucked deep into the Cascade foothills. I hadn't been there since I was a child, and even then I remembered the house as sagging and lifeless, a place that whispered too loudly when the wind passed through. Damien turned to me, feigning sympathy. Well, that's something. Maybe you can open a pumpkin patch. He snorted and leaned back, clearly pleased with himself. I said nothing. My throat felt tight. My hands clenched the armrest of the chair. The meeting ended quickly after that. The lawyer handed me an envelope containing the deed and a tarnished brass key. Damien barely waited to shake hands before breezing out the door, whistling to himself. Outside, the sun felt too bright, too harsh. Nathan was waiting on the sidewalk, arms crossed. My fiancé, or maybe not for much longer. Well, he asked, not even attempting a smile. I told him everything. About Damien getting the condo, about me getting the crumbling house in Dusk Hollow. With each word, Nathan's expression grew colder. You're kidding, he said, shaking his head. She gave you a shack in the middle of nowhere? It's not a shack, it's a joke, Eliana, he snapped. A capital condo is something useful, something real. You get stuck with a rotting relic, and somehow I'm not surprised. I stared at him, stunned. Nathan, I'm done. He cut in sharply. I've tried, Eliana. Really. But you're always a step behind, always dragging dead weight. I can't build a life with someone who gets handed garbage and calls it a gift. The words hit me like a slap. I had stood by him through 2 layoffs and 3 relocations. I had believed in him when no one else did. And here he was. Done. He turned and walked away, just like that. I stood there for a long moment, feeling hollowed out, weightless. Then I looked down at the old key in my palm. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting. I didn't know what was in Dusk Hollow. But I knew I couldn't stay here. Not in this city. Not with this pain. So I did the only thing that made sense. I bought a one-way bus ticket and left. The bus wheezed and creaked its way through endless pines and winding roads, like it too was unsure about heading to Dusk Hollow. I sat by the window, watching the mist roll between the trees, my forehead pressed against the glass. The outside world was a blur of gray and green. My thoughts were worse. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I left Portland. My phone was turned off. There were a dozen missed calls from Nathan and a few cold texts from Damien, but I didn't bother reading them. What was there to say? The city had spat me out, and I wasn't planning on crawling back. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the brass key. It was old, worn smooth from time, with a floral engraving on the head. Delicate, intentional, like something from another century. It felt heavy in my hand, not in weight, but in meaning. My grandmother must have held it once, maybe many times. I wondered what she'd think of me now, alone on a bus, heading toward a house no one wanted. When the driver finally called out Dusk Hollow, I almost didn't stand. It sounded less like a destination and more like a warning. The village greeted me with silence. A cold wind brushed past as I stepped down from the bus, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The road was empty, framed by leaning fences and time-worn houses. No cafe, no cars, no chatter, just a worn wooden sign that read "Welcome to Dusk Hollow" with one side splintered off. I pulled my suitcase behind me, the wheels stuttering on broken pavement. Every step echoed in the stillness. A few curtain hems shifted behind dusty windows as I passed, eyes watching but unseen. I could feel them, strangers measuring me from the shadows. The house sat at the end of a sloping path, flanked by thick overgrowth and wild shrubs. It loomed like a memory, familiar but distant, its gables curled at the edges. Ivy crawled up the walls. The paint, once soft blue, had chipped away to a ghostly gray. I stopped at the crooked gate and took a breath. Then I stepped inside. The porch creaked under my weight. I fitted the key into the lock, half expecting it not to work. But it did. The door swung open with a groan. I blinked. The air wasn't stale. It wasn't musty or moldy or choked with cobwebs. It was clean, touched by lavender and wood smoke. The hardwood floors, though scuffed, were swept. The windows, though smudged, were unbroken. The furniture was modest but intact. Sofas covered with knitted throws, shelves filled with small ceramic figures, a grandfather clock in the corner still ticking faintly. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. I stepped farther in, past the entryway and into the living room. There were framed photographs along the mantel, old, sepia-toned images of people I didn't recognize. Some wore uniforms, some stood beside horses, some stared directly into the lens with a haunting calm. I passed my fingers over a worn armchair near the fireplace. The cushion dipped, as if someone had just left it. My chest tightened. Had someone been here? Was someone still here? A cold breeze passed behind me, though the door was closed. I turned slowly. The house was quiet, unmoving. But something in the air had shifted. I wasn't alone. Not in the haunted way, not in the horror movie way, but in the deeply human sense of presence. The sense that someone had once lived here with care, that someone still wanted this house to be alive. And for the first time since the will reading, I felt a flicker of something that didn't feel like grief or betrayal. It felt like purpose. The next morning, the house was blanketed in fog. Dusk Hollow seemed even quieter than the day before, as if the village itself was holding its breath. I walked barefoot across the creaking floorboards, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin. There was something sacred about the stillness here. Unnerving, but oddly comforting. I decided to start exploring the house room by room. There was no rush. I had nowhere else to be and nothing to return to. The second floor had 3 bedrooms. One was locked. The other 2 were musty but intact. Beds made, quilts folded, books left on nightstands as if someone had meant to come back. I found a photograph tucked into a drawer. My grandmother in her 20s, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. Her eyes were sharp even then, like she knew more than she ever let on. As I stepped into the hallway again, I noticed something strange near the far end. A portion of the wall looked different. The wallpaper there didn't quite match. The seam was crooked, and the wood beneath bulged slightly. I ran my fingers along the wall. It sounded hollow. I pressed harder. Something clicked. A narrow door popped open, almost silently. Behind it was a steep, dust-covered staircase leading downward. But this wasn't the same staircase that led to the cellar. This was tucked away, completely hidden behind the wall. I hesitated for a moment. Then I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and started down. The air changed instantly. Cooler. Drier. It smelled of aged paper, wax, and time. At the bottom, I stepped into a room I never expected. It was a private archive. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, filled with books, journals, and parchment scrolls. Some were bound in cracked leather. Others were wrapped in linen or pressed between wooden boards. There were crates of photographs, glass display cases holding antique compasses, inkwells, maps. A small desk stood in the corner, covered in handwritten notes and what looked like translation work. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a reading room. It was a hidden repository, a collection carefully preserved, meticulously organized, and completely secret. I walked slowly between the shelves, my fingers trembling as I reached for a book at random. The title was in Latin, too faded to read easily. I pulled another, this one in old Cyrillic script, then French, then Arabic. I could read parts of some, others I could only guess at. A few had wax seals still intact. There was a feeling in the room, deep and buzzing beneath the surface. Not fear, not danger. Something more powerful. Purpose. I returned to the desk, drawn to a leather-bound journal lying open in the center. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was familiar. My grandmother's. Page after page of notes in different languages, sketches of symbols, cross-references between books. It was like watching her mind at work. And then I saw my name, scribbled in the corner of one page. Eliana. I froze. My hands shook as I turned the pages more carefully. There it was again. My name, underlined next to words like trust, lineage, and inheritance. Whatever this place was, it wasn't meant for Damien. It wasn't meant for anyone else in the family. It was meant for me. Not because I was successful or ambitious, but because I would understand it. Because I wouldn't try to sell it or hide it or exploit it. Because she knew I'd protect it. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by secrets, and realized that this house was never meant to be a punishment. It was a gift, a mystery wrapped in dust and silence, and I was just beginning to unwrap it. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind wouldn't let me. I sat on the living room floor long after the fire had died down, the journal from the hidden room resting on my knees. I kept rereading the pages where my name was written, trying to make sense of the notes. Some were written like riddles. Others referenced dates, people, and places I'd never heard of. There was one line that struck me more than any other. If she finds the safe, she will find the truth. The safe. I hadn't seen one. Not yet. But now that I was looking, I knew where to go. At dawn, I headed to the basement, this time through the main stairs, not the secret one. It was colder down there, and darker. The walls were made of stone, the ceiling low and arched. I scanned the room carefully, brushing cobwebs from the corners. Then I saw it. Hidden behind a stack of firewood and an old trunk was a square metal door bolted into the wall. Rusted around the edges, thick, old-fashioned, and silent in the shadows. A combination lock sat at its center. I stared at it. And I knew. The code wasn't random. I pressed the numbers in slowly. My grandmother's birth date. Month, day, year. A soft click echoed in the basement. The door swung open with a groan of metal against metal. Inside, wrapped in linen and sealed envelopes, were papers. So many papers. And beneath them, boxes tied with ribbon, photographs stacked carefully, and a velvet pouch I dared not open yet. I reached for the first envelope. It was addressed to me, in the same handwriting as the one I had seen upstairs. Eliana, if you are reading this, then I am gone. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. My darling girl, I wish I could have told you everything while I was alive, but time, pride, and fear got in the way. You always asked questions no one else bothered to ask. You always looked behind what others accepted. That's why I left the house to you. Not because I pitied you, but because I trusted you. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I know you must wonder why Damien received the condo and you got an old house. The truth is simple. He would have sold this place the moment he saw it. But you would see it. You would feel it. You would uncover it. She wrote about the library, the history of Dusk Hollow, and a time when their family had been entrusted with preserving knowledge, real knowledge across generations. She had continued the work in secret, hiding books, documents, and artifacts that others had wanted destroyed, stolen, or forgotten. The house is not just shelter, she wrote. It's a vessel. It holds what matters most: our lineage, our legacy, our truth. And you, Eliana, are the only one who can carry it forward. I read the letter 3 times. By the end, my hands were shaking. This wasn't just inheritance, it was identity. And it explained why I'd always felt different. Disconnected from the rest of the family. Drawn to stories, books, details everyone else overlooked. I wasn't a misfit. I was chosen. I looked back at the open safe, and I knew I hadn't even begun to uncover everything. But I would. I owed her that. And I owed it to myself. I spent the next 2 days cataloging everything in the hidden room and the safe. I worked in silence, moving between the library and basement with a notebook in hand, my thoughts constantly spiraling between awe and confusion. The scope of what my grandmother had left me was staggering. Some of the books had markings I didn't recognize, strange symbols that repeated in margins, inside covers, and in the spines themselves. One book had no words at all, just illustrations of stars, maps, and human hands drawn with eerie precision. I needed help. So I turned to the one place that never failed me: academia, online. I posted photos anonymously in an archivist's forum I'd lurked on for years. I uploaded a few scans of covers and carefully blurred out the text on more sensitive documents. Within hours, I had dozens of messages. Curious, skeptical, but one stood out. A user named WEX47 replied simply, "Where did you get this? These aren't reproductions, they're original. I need to see them in person." I hesitated, but something in his tone wasn't greedy or intrusive. It was reverent. We exchanged private messages. His real name was Professor Keir Alden Wexler, an expert in medieval cartography and esoteric texts. He'd worked with libraries in Europe and Asia. He offered to travel to Dusk Hollow that same week. Said he owed my grandmother a debt. That line gave me pause. "You knew her?" I asked. "I met her once, years ago, at a conference in Vienna." She asked very specific questions about preservation of forbidden archives. I never forgot her. That sealed it for me. When Keir arrived, he didn't waste time. Tall, angular, and dressed in an old tweed coat, he stepped into the hidden room like a pilgrim entering a temple. For hours, he said nothing. Just pulled books gently off shelves, handled documents with gloved fingers, made tiny notes in a leather-bound journal. Finally, he looked at me, eyes wide with something like fear. "Eliana," he said slowly, "some of these pieces, they don't exist. I mean, they're not supposed to. This book here..." He held up a thick tome bound in red leather. "This is a Jesuit codex believed lost in a fire in 1752. The original, not a copy. And this?" He pulled a small scroll wrapped in black silk. "This belonged to the personal collection of Gustav Nachtmann, who vanished during the Nazi raids. This was presumed destroyed." My heart raced. "So, it's valuable?" I asked. He let out a breathless laugh. "Some of these items could be worth 7 figures. To private collectors, maybe more. But the historical value, the intellectual value, is beyond price. Eliana, this isn't just a personal archive. It's a sanctuary of endangered knowledge. It's holy." I said nothing. I was still processing. He set his bag down and said, "I want to help. I can put you in contact with preservationists, maybe institutions, if you want to donate or sell. But be careful. If word gets out, you'll attract attention. Not all of it good." I nodded. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, turning over the possibilities. I could sell some of it, live comfortably, fund restorations, or I could keep it intact, honor my grandmother's purpose. I went to the safe and took out the velvet pouch. Inside was a ring, delicate, silver, with a single etched symbol, one of the strange ones I'd seen in the margins. I slipped it on. It fit perfectly. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to something bigger than myself. Not because of money, because of meaning, because my name was written into the legacy of this house. And now it was up to me what came next. It started with a knock. Sharp, confident, wrong. I had just finished labeling a stack of parchment envelopes when I heard it. 3 distinct raps on the front door. My pulse quickened. No one knocked in Dusk Hollow. The locals either ignored me entirely or left vegetables on the porch in silence. I opened the door slowly. Damien stood on the other side, wearing a cashmere coat and a smug smile. "Eliana," he said like it was a greeting and an insult all at once. "Wow, still standing. I didn't think you'd last a week out here." My stomach tightened. "How did you even know where to find me?" "You think Nathan wouldn't talk?" he said casually, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. "The guy's still bitter, you know. Pretty easy to get information when someone feels betrayed." I shut the door behind him, resisting the urge to slam it. He walked around the living room like he was inspecting property he already owned. "So this is the haunted old house," he murmured. "Gotta say, it doesn't look like much, but I hear there's something interesting in the basement." I froze. "What did you just say?" Damien turned to me, eyes cold. "Let's not waste time, Elle. You found something, didn't you? Antique books, scrolls, documents. That's why you haven't called. That's why Keir Wexler came out here." So he knew everything. Or at least enough. "You were watching me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. "Here's my proposal. You give me the archive. All of it. I give you the condo in Seattle. Clean title, no strings. You walk away with something real, and I get something useful." I stared at him, speechless. "You want to trade the entire legacy of our grandmother?" I said slowly. "For a condo?" He shrugged. "Books rot. Markets don't." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear, not even anger. Disgust. "This was never meant for you," I said. "She knew it, I know it. And deep down, so do you." Damien's expression darkened. "You think you're better than me because you like old paper and candlelight? You've always been the background noise in this family, Eliana. You were the pity project, Grandma's side hobby." I stepped forward, calm but direct. "And yet she trusted me. Not you." His lips curled into a sneer. "Think very carefully. If you make the wrong choice, you'll regret it." I took a deep breath. "I already made the right one. You're the one who'll regret thinking this house was just wooden walls." Silence fell between us like a dropped curtain. Then, without another word, Damien stormed out. Later that night, while locking the front door, I noticed something out of place, a loose panel near the cellar entrance. I bent down. It had been pried open. A dirty boot print marked the stone floor just inside. He had already tried to get in, and he would try again. Only next time I'd be ready. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I waited. Every creak in the house felt louder than it should. I sat in the kitchen with a flashlight, a cup of cold tea, and my grandmother's ring tight on my finger. By dawn, I had a plan. The first thing I did was move the most sensitive items, rare scrolls, the Jesuit Codex, anything with personal symbols, into the safe. I placed decoys on the shelves, water-damaged replicas from the village library and pages I'd copied by hand. Then I set up an old camcorder I'd found in a trunk upstairs. The lens pointed directly at the archive room's entrance. I had no idea if it would even work, but I had to try. That evening, I left the door to the hidden room slightly ajar. It didn't take long. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I heard the floorboards shift. Soft steps. Calculated. Familiar. I stayed hidden behind the thick hallway curtain, barely breathing. The figure moved through the house, paused near the living room, then slipped silently into the secret hallway. I waited until I heard the creak of the archive door open, then stepped forward and flicked on the hallway light. "Looking for something?" I said. Damien froze mid-step, holding one of the decoy books in his hand. The expression on his face shifted from shock to rage within seconds. "You set me up," he hissed. I stepped closer. "You broke into my home. You were trying to steal what doesn't belong to you." He laughed bitterly. "Nothing in this family ever belonged to me. Not the legacy. Not her affection. It was always you. The weird little girl with dusty books and imaginary friends." I swallowed hard. So you thought you'd rewrite history by taking mine? Damien threw the book down. Don't act like you're some chosen one. You don't know what this collection really is. You think Grandma told you everything? You think she was some kind of saint? He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I recognized it instantly. One of the documents from the safe. My chest tightened. How did you get that? Your Professor Wexler was careless, Damien said smugly. I followed him after he left. Paid someone to track his contacts. He talks more than you think. I unfolded the paper and my stomach dropped. It was a letter. Not from my grandmother, but from her brother, my great-uncle Elias, dated 1967. It detailed a betrayal in the family, how one of Maria Yelena's siblings had tried to sell part of the archive during the Cold War, how he'd vanished soon after. You know who Elias was? Damien said, stepping forward. My grandfather. Yeah, that's right. The side of the family no one talks about. He pointed at the archive door. So you tell me, if your grandmother's legacy is so sacred, why did she erase half of it? I stared at him. Everything felt like it tilted sideways. But then I understood. She didn't erase it, I said quietly. She hid it, because it was dangerous. Because someone in your bloodline already tried to profit from something meant to be protected. I lifted my phone. And now you just proved history repeats itself. I had already called the local sheriff before confronting him, had already forwarded the footage from the camcorder. The knock came 3 minutes later. Damien didn't resist. Not really. As he was led away in cuffs for trespassing and attempted theft, he looked back at me and spat, "This isn't over." I stood in the doorway of the archive, hand resting against the frame. Yes, I said softly. It is. And I meant it. After Damien was taken away, the house fell quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, no longer laced with fear or tension. It was the silence of peace, of stillness that had been earned. I sat on the porch wrapped in one of my grandmother's wool shawls, watching the sun rise over Dusk Hollow. The fog had lifted. For the first time since I arrived, I could see the whole valley spread out below. Ancient trees standing like sentinels, rooftops curling with wood smoke, and a narrow river sparkling in the early light. I could breathe again. The sheriff had been kind, if surprised. He remembered my grandmother, said she was a strange but brilliant woman. He took my statement, reviewed the footage, and assured me the matter would be handled. Damien would face legal consequences, though I suspected his punishment would never be as sharp as knowing he failed to take what he believed was owed to him. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about what I chose to do next. I spent the next few days reorganizing the library, cataloging volumes, sorting letters, transcribing fragile pages into digital files. Professor Wexler returned to help. He brought archival gloves, vacuum-sealed bags, and an expression of reverence I'd only ever seen in the faces of people standing before great art or history itself. This house is a miracle, he said once, eyes sweeping across the room. I didn't disagree, but I wasn't ready to sell. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One night, while sorting a box of letters, I found another envelope addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. This one was shorter, written in a trembling script. My dearest Eliana, if you are reading this, then you've made it farther than I ever dreamed. You've seen what lies beneath the silence, the dust, the shadows. You've seen the truth of who you are. I never needed you to be successful. I needed you to be steady, to be brave, to look at what others discard and see its worth. That's what makes a guardian. That's what makes you. You are not alone, not now, not ever. This house is your inheritance, but so is your strength. I loved you with my whole heart. Always, grandmother. The tears came then. Not from grief, but from recognition. From knowing finally that I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't the shadow in the family. I was the light someone had quietly prepared. In the weeks that followed, I made my choice. I registered the house as a private historical archive with the local university and cultural trust. The village elders, once distant, began to stop by. One brought warm bread. Another brought old photographs of my grandmother as a girl. They started sharing stories, some whispered, some vivid, about how she had helped families during wartime, hidden rare books for safekeeping, and taught their children how to read by candlelight. They remembered her not as strange, but as sacred. I turned the parlor into a reading room, the upstairs bedrooms into guest quarters for visiting scholars. The hidden room remained as it was, a sanctuary, untouched except by those who understood what it meant. One afternoon, while dusting the windowsill, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I didn't look like the woman who had arrived here weeks ago, trembling with grief and shame. I looked rooted, whole. And when I stepped outside into the sunlight, the wind carried the scent of pine and old pages of something ancient and alive. It wrapped around me like an embrace. I stood still and whispered, "Thank you." And maybe it was only my imagination, but I thought I heard her voice in return. Soft, proud, smiling. "I always believed in you." That night, I sat by the fireplace, the same one I remembered from my childhood. I picked up the red-bound codex and opened it to the first page. And I began to read, not just to understand the past, but to build my future. Because this house was mine. This life was mine. And for the first time ever, I was exactly where I was meant to be.